It's Christmas this week, which means we are now officially in winter. And if you know me well, you'll know that I'm very much a seasonal reader. I like to match the settings of my books to the weather I'm currently in, just for a more immersive experience, I guess. So I thought I'd tell you about some of the more wintry books I have on my TBR list over the next few months. And I'm going to be telling you what they're about and why I've decided to read them soon. And if you're new here, hi, welcome, I'm Katerina. I chat about all things books, so subscribe if that's your thing. First up on my list is actually a book I've been wanting to read since last winter, and bear in mind that the title is quite long. It's Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. Tokarczuk? Tokarczuk. This novel is set in a remote Polish village, and we follow quite an eccentric and quirky woman who adores animals. However, she becomes entangled in a string of mysterious murders of men she knows, and the majority of which are hunters. And she attempts to go to the authorities when she's convinced that the animals are actually taking revenge. Whilst this is a literary crime novel, it's also full of philosophical ideas as well as dark humour. I want to read this in winter, firstly, and perhaps most obviously because of its atmospheric setting. It's based in a small Polish village that's filled with snow, and all this mystery is taking place over the harsher winter months. And I've also heard that it shows just how unrelenting winter can be in rural areas, especially when it's just constantly cold and dark. And I do actually want to read this book soon whilst I'm home over Christmas, because my family home is more in rural Yorkshire, which I think this would definitely be a better setting. Secondly, one of the other major themes in the book is isolation. Our main character is a very contemplative person, she lives in solitude, and winter for me is very much a time of solitude and introspection, as it's just a more quieter and reflective season, which also goes hand in hand with another big theme in the book of philosophical reflection, as there's quite a heavy dose of exploring justice and morality and existential questioning about humans' relationships with animals. Additionally, this is ultimately a crime novel, so it's going to be full of mystery and eerie undertones, which for me definitely feel more spooky during the colder months, so I definitely can't wait to read this. And another book that's also set in cold environments with eerie undertones is Moon of the Crusted Snow by waubgeshig. This is a post-apocalyptic novel, and it's set in Canada, centered around this remote community. And during a particularly bad winter, they lose all power in communication with the outside world. This causes the community to panic, especially when their supplies start to dwindle to nothing and tensions begin to escalate between them. And we follow the protagonist as he attempts to help his people navigate through this uncertainty and fear, especially when outsiders arrive to their community seeking refuge. This story is very heavy in themes of survival, close-knit communities, and managing a world in crisis. Once again, this has a great setting for a winter read, as it literally has snow in the title. Plus, it sounds like these people are basically bunkering down to survive the winter, which is basically what I try and do every year. The novel also explores survival and resilience as the community struggle to survive with these dwindling resources and isolation. And honestly, for me, winter just feels like this. I find it a very lonely and difficult time of year, and every day just feels like Groundhog Day to get through. And the idea of sticking with your community feels very reminiscent of winter to me. Apart from Christmas festivities, I'm not really going out being social and meeting new people over winter. I'm more bunkering down with my close friends and family. And it's this intimate connection with people I already know that very much helps me get through the thick of winter. And this novel very much seems to be about that. It's about a bunch of people coming together in order to try and survive against the harsh conditions. And I know a lot of my winter books can be quite bleak. Unfortunately, that is just how I view winter. I am a seasonal depression girly. But here and there, I do read a book that is more light-hearted. It is not all doom and gloom here. So the third book on my list, which I'm hoping will cheer me up a little bit this season, is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This is a historical fantasy novel that's set in medieval Russia, and we follow a young girl who is gifted with this ability to see spirits and creatures from Russian folklore. However, the villagers begin to abandon tradition as Christianity starts to become a bit more mainstream and popular, and when supernatural dark forces threaten her community, this girl must use her powers to protect those around her. Firstly, medieval Russia. We're going to have a lot of cold, wintry weather, which is very fitting for the season. But I also like that this book explores this clash around myth versus religion, which I feel is definitely more prominent around this time of year in Christmas, especially exploring this notion of old traditions versus change and how people tend to react to that. I also just love reading fantasy novels around Christmas, so I'm thinking this should be my next read. Because this is full of Russian fairy tales, novels with myths and magic are just more fun to read during this time of year. Another reason this is on my TBR is that I heard a lot of people say that this book is full of resilience and hope, because the main character faces challenges not only from the supernatural but also from her community. And I think reading about another young girl's resilience will definitely help me get me through the winter and actually grow a pair, because if a young girl can do it whilst facing evil, so can I. And next up on my winter list is Winter in Sokcho, and it's by the author who I believe is French, so forgive my pronunciation, but I believe it's pronounced Elisa dusapin. And we're really going all over the world here because this next book is set in a South Korean seaside town called Sokcho, and it's centered on this young Franco-Korean woman who is working at a guest house during the off-season. She lives a fairly quiet, routine life, but this is one day disrupted when a reserved French graphic novelist arrives hoping to seek inspiration. And they essentially form a connection where they end up talking about themselves, their parents and family, and also their culture. I'm including this because I think whilst Christmas can be a time about belonging and intimacy with those close to us, it can also be about separation, especially those who are culturally dislocated or are not close with their family and friends. And I've heard this novel covers these themes, especially exploring how people can experience solitude and isolation during the winter. I've also heard people say that this book has a very slow narrative. It is more of a slow burn sort of story, which I think more relaxed narratives are actually better to read during this time of year because I think it matches the slower pace of winter a little bit better. And I think slower stories like this really allows yourself to lose yourself in the emotions that the characters are experiencing. Or maybe I'm just an empath. Who knows? But next up, we have another novel that also sounds quite emotional, and that's The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. This book is set in Alaska in the 1920s, and we follow a childless couple struggling with isolation and hardship in their remote home. And longing for a baby, they actually build a child out of snow during the winter, but mysteriously the next day, a wild girl appears out of the woods. However, whilst the couple grow to love her, they question whether she's actually real. Again, another title with the word snow in it. You know it's going to be an immersive wintry read, because we do have vivid descriptions of blizzards and icy landscapes and surviving the rural cold. We also have a magical realism element, which, like I said, I particularly love reading during this time of year. And I think the themes here are very fitting for the season, especially because it explores this human connection and how winter can bring people together for warmth and support and companionship, especially during these cold and difficult times. And it's this couple's resilience and endurance, which is really the heart of the story. I've also read that this book has a lot of themes in hope and renewal also. And I really do love books that explore hope and new beginnings because this is really what we have winter for. I feel like in winter we really do have to grieve the life that once was so that transformation and new things can come our way. So overall, that's a long about way of saying I'm really looking forward to reading this book. And my next book is also set in the past, and that's Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. This is a historical novel that's based in 19th century Iceland, and it's actually based on the true story of the last woman that was actually executed in the country. This woman has been accused for a double murder, and she's sent to live with a rural family under house arrest while she's waiting execution. However, once this family and the young priest that's there get to know her, they actually question her guilt and also the severity of her sentence. I'm beginning to sound like a broken record, but wintry setting. It's pretty damn cold in Iceland. But also, I'm basically a hermit. During winter, I essentially hibernate until it gets a bit warmer outside, which I won't lie, probably feels very similar to house arrest sometimes, even though what I'm doing is completely optional. So I think I'll be able to relate to the main character here in the fact that she is housebound and literally doesn't go anywhere else. But I also want to read this closer to Christmas because there's lots of explorations regarding notions of justice and mercy. And I do think that people can be most forgiving and kind around this time of year, as being merry and having a deeper sympathy towards humanity is something I definitely see more in other people during the festive season. Also, this book just seems to have quite a moody and reflective undertone, which I think very much fits this time of year. For my 7th book in this list, we have yet another novel that has the word snow in its title, and that's Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au. This is actually quite a simple plot. We basically follow a mother and a daughter who travel together to Japan, and as they walk through Tokyo exploring parks and cafes and galleries, they discuss various aspects of life together. And the narrator, who we actually don't know whether is the mum or the daughter, reflects on their relationship, and they explore through conversations how their stories can both connect them but also separate them. Winter and Christmas is a time for me that I, without fail, see my parents every single year, especially my mum. I always at least spend 1 or 2 weeks with her, so I feel like this is very fitting with the plot of the novel as well. I'm also excited to read this book because I've heard that there is a lot of detail here on sensory imagery, such as describing food and their beauty and their surroundings. And I think reading about small details like these always tend to make them special. Like personally, whenever I read about food or nature, it always makes me more appreciative towards it. And I think it is important important to read about such comforts during this time of year because it definitely makes me more thankful and appreciative of it when a lot of other people don't have that. Also, the novel overall seems to have a very gentle and meditative pace where it reflects on memories and moments between them. And being home with my mum definitely makes me reflect on our relationship and the moments that we've had together. But also, winter is just a time for me where I do a lot of personal reflection, especially over my past year. So I think that this book is going to be very fitting on my list. And finally, the very last book I have on my list is a little bit of a different one, but I will explain why it's there, and that's The Plague by Albert Camus. This is a philosophical novel that's set in an Algerian city which is suddenly struck by the bubonic plague. And the story is centered around a doctor and a few of the residents there who end up being quarantined. Some light 2020 trauma for you there. And during quarantine, this group experienced fear and isolation and uncertainty, but they also end up showing resilience and solidarity. Whilst I read that this novel is actually an allegory for the human condition and the ability to fight against evil, and how people respond to crisis and the importance of collective responsibility, I added this book to my list because myself and everyone around me tends to get deathly ill around winter. There's currently some sort of insane super flu going around in the UK at the moment, which is knocking everyone out. I somehow haven't caught it yet, but that's making me incredibly nervous because it means I'll probably catch it soon when I'm actually home for Christmas. But the whole quarantine aspect of this book also just reminds me of bunkering down to hibernate over winter. And during the actual COVID lockdowns, I actually just spent all my time reading, and that's basically what I do during winter as well. So I think this book will be very fitting. And on that joyous note of potential illness, those are all the books I'm hoping to read over winter. Have you read any of these books? Please let me know what you thought about them in the comments, because if you like them, I'm going to bump them higher up my TBR list. And if you haven't read any of these books, let me know what's on your TBR list to read over winter. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please drop a like down below if you did. It really helps my channel out. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. I make a lot of bookish content that I think you'd like. Feel free to also follow me on my socials. I have a Goodreads where I update in real time when I'm reading. And feel free to also follow me on my Instagram. I post more personal stuff on there, but I also post the books that I've read, letting you know what I've rated them out of 10 and what they're about. After I finish filming this video, I'm actually getting my train home today, which I am very excited about because I just feel incredibly burnt out and I think I'm just ready to go home to relax and unwind for a bit. The lead up to Christmas is always super fun, but I have literally been out every single day for the past 3 weeks and I am tired and hungover and just ready for a break. And I'm also just ready to leave London for a bit because I need some fresh Yorkshire air to do me good. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Love ya. Bye.